Well, I want to welcome all of you today. I'm very excited about our program. Our guest today is Dr. David Miller. He lives in Platteville, Wisconsin. He's a member of the Lutheran Church of Peace, where I serve. He has been a professor of biology at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. He also has been a professor at West Virginia, where he was part of the staff that teaches and trains as far as the medical staff, as far as training physicians. And so, David, I just want to thank you so much for being a guest today, and I've always appreciated you, and also just, times where we've just visited, and I've oftentimes have got questions about things, and I've always appreciated your knowledge and in sharing those things. And I know that, we want to talk about some things that have to do with biology and science. But I should mention that David is an organist at our church, a very accomplished organist. I always appreciate his playing the organ, and I know a lot of people do. So if you ever want to, hear some good organ playing, he generally plays the organ on the last Saturday evening at 6 o'clock worship at the Lutheran Church of Peace, the last Saturday of the month. He also has composed some music. David, what's the latest one that you co-wrote a choir piece, and I don't know if you just wanted to share a little bit about that has been your latest publication.
Well, shortly after 9/11, I walked into my office one morning, and I couldn't think about biology. The only thing that came to me were these words to a blank verse poem, which I entitled Towers. And after I wrote it, I sent a copy over to my good friend Greg Dennis. We've been friends since high school. Greg wrote the music for Towers. It is sung a cappella. It has been sung by the South Shore Chorale, the Mount Horeb Chorale, the Dubuque Chorale, the Platteville Chorale. 2 years ago in the summer, they traveled to New York and they performed it at Ground Zero. It is now published by Alliance Publishing. It's in Cinema and is being distributed nationwide. And we hope that one of these days it will be officially acclaimed as the national song of mourning for all individuals who have perished in disasters, either natural or by acts of terrorism.
Wow, that's really great. And you've shown me this piece, and it's really special. And well, anyway, David, you have got multiple degrees. Doctorate degrees where you've graduated with highest honors, and you have been a professor where you've taught many students. And so, in other words, and you're also a person of faith, a person who has read your Bible and has studied your Bible. And so I thought you'd be a good one to maybe answer some of the questions that I would have. And I'm guessing that these are questions that so many of you may have as well. I think one of the things that we get into as I visit with people where they struggle with faith, it just seems like there's almost like a division, there's a separation between faith and science. It's almost like either you have to make your choice. Either you believe in what the Bible says and be a person of faith, or you've got to believe in what science says. And I don't feel like there's really a contradiction here, but rather, God is the ruler or the creator of all things. And so, I always say that religion is always trying to answer the question of why, and science is always answering the question of how. David, I don't know how you generally have tried to, mesh the two together and, between faith and science, but I know a lot of times people, they sometimes can lose their faith because they think, well, as I'm in Sunday school class, I learn it one way, and then when I go to science class, I learn it another. I guess as far as I'm concerned, David, I'm not a scientist like you are, and I just believe in that God has created all things, and how God creates, I guess, is one thing, but I have a hard time believing in any kind of a theory that wouldn't have God as the creator. What is your take on all of this?
Well, I've studied a lot of chemistry and biochemistry for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I've studied a lot of cell biology. In fact, if we were to look at a cell, which in high school biology is presented as a rather simple thing, it is extraordinarily complex. what I learned back when I was in high school biology about a cell membrane was compared to something like saran wrap. But it's not like saran wrap at all. It has proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane. Those proteins are extraordinarily complex. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and if the protein is made incorrectly by so much as one amino acid, or in some cases there's a tolerance of 2 amino acids, it doesn't work. And it's difficult for me, as someone who was taught biostatistics, to accept the fact that all of these complex organelles and all of these complex biochemicals which occur inside of the cell came about in a random process. It seems like they had some type of direction. Either that or they would have had to have had millions and millions and millions of years to come about simply by chance. And as we look at the origin of the earth and at the age of the earth, we find that that window of opportunity for the evolution of life gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Not only does the window of opportunity get smaller and smaller, but the physiometric conditions of the ancient earth seem to be such that the formation of these large complex organic molecules would be extremely difficult. We were told at one time that the earth had a reducing atmosphere and that oxygen was not present. But we now know that as long as water has been present on the earth, there has been oxygen. The source of that oxygen has been the photoreduction of water. And the presence of water on earth is somewhat of a mystery because according to scientists, way back in the beginning, the earth coalesced, condensed, was extremely hot, and most of the lighter elements were driven off. And then all of a sudden, 4 or 5, 6 million years later, the earth had a tremendous amount of water. And water is necessary for the living condition.
Yeah. So, Dr. Miller, would you say that, what's the likelihood that creation could happen without God?
It is extremely difficult to estimate a statistical probability when one throws in the consideration of an omniscient, omnipresent, supreme being, because you can order all kinds of reagents from the chemical company, but none will come labeled God. So God cannot be put into the equation. It's extremely difficult. We can look at the components of the chemicals which are found in a cell. Carbohydrates are probably the simplest. They are the energy component. There are energy drinks that contain caffeine and they contain a lot of sugar. Sugar is a good source of energy. It's not the body's only source of energy, but it's a really good source of energy. Then we have proteins, which are made up of amino acids. Proteins can either be structural proteins or they can be motor proteins. Motor proteins are proteins which change shape when a chemical called ATP, the universal energy molecule of the cell, is added to them. ATP is a mystery chemical because without protein enzymes, we can't synthesize ATP. And without ATP, we can't synthesize the enzymes. We have DNA, which is the genetic blueprint for life. Well, DNA seems to be rather simple at a first look. It's made up of the nitrogenous bases adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. And taken as triplet codons, the DNA codes for what the protein is going to be. And some of these proteins are hundreds of amino acids in length, and once again, a single error in an amino acid can cause the protein to be non-functional. I'll give you a case in point. There is sickle cell disease. It's caused by a substitution of valine glutamic acid at the 6th position in the 141 amino acid chain of alpha hemoglobin. Don't ask me to repeat that. But I think I said it correctly. one amino acid substitution and we have sickle cell disease. 2 or 3 amino acid substitutions in the other hemoglobin chains and we have non-functional hemoglobin. Not only that, but in order to maintain hemoglobin, you have to maintain iron, which is the heme unit, at a +2 valence. If it oxidizes to iron 3, it won't carry any oxygen. And yet, it is continuously in the presence of oxygen. So there is an elaborate enzyme, it's called methemoglobin reductase, and it maintains the iron at a +2 valence so that it is able to carry the oxygen in a vast sea of oxygen that otherwise would oxidize the iron from +2 to +3. In the absence of hemoglobin, the human brain couldn't possibly work, even if other oxygen-carrying pigments such as hemocyanin were substituted. The Bunsen coefficient of oxygen solubility in plasma is about 0.3 volume percent. With hemoglobin, that's increased 70-fold. 70-fold, so that the oxygenation of the blood is about 20%.
Okay. Well, when we look at creation and life, you know, as I study the Bible, but then as I just study history, you know, going back to the origin, when was the first, I guess, intelligible culture, and we'd go back to the Sumerian and the Chaldean cultures. I mean, that date back, well, according to history, like back to 4500 BC. But then the Bible, if we're studying the Bible, we don't have a contradiction there because the Bible basically says that that's where the origin of life started as far as culture and society was back in the same, you know, the Sumerian, and it's out of Chaldean, and it's basically then out of those cultures that Abraham is called. You know, so I guess I'm just trying to see, you know, where would there be a contradiction, you know, as far as, you know, Bible and science, and, you know, to say, well, no, there's not a contradiction, but actually, you know, as we, you know, look at science, as we look at history, as we look at society, it all kind of goes back to the same point, the same origin. You know, I guess what I'm wondering, you know, a lot of time, you know, today now, you know, we hear so much about evolution. You know, evolution, is that possible? Evolution, is it possible without God? Evolution, does it contradict, you know, what we learn in the Bible as far as like creationism? You know, here again, you know, you're talking about the cell. I mean, what's likelihood? You know, a lot of times I just like to have a simple illustration of, you know, as we look at our, you know, outside at our driveways, does the car just appear, or was there a designer and a creator to that car? Or if that car didn't have a designer and a creator, how long would it take just through, I guess, natural things, and where do those natural things come to in order for a car with that precision to actually happen without a designer and a creator? And I guess I look at creation as being so much more complex than an automobile, you know. So if I have a hard time believing that a car just appears on my driveway, or that it, you know, somehow it took, you know, billions of years in order for it to happen the way that it is, if I have a hard time believing that a car didn't have a creator and a designer and a builder, then it's that much harder for me to believe that, you know, creation itself didn't have a creator and a designer and a builder. Does this make sense? Or you understand kind of what I'm getting at here? I mean, meaning that, you know, for the viewers out there saying, what's the likelihood of creation happening without a creator and a designer? I mean, you know, to put it kind of in layman's terms, you know, the scientists are probably following you a lot on the cell and all the components and the DNA. But if I were to, I mean, you got these cards out here, Dave. I mean, what's are you going to do a card trick for us? What is the point here?
Okay, I'll get to the point.
Okay.
My interpretation of Genesis is that it is a statement of God's dominion over all of his creation, the entire universe. It is possible that a creator created all of the elements and all of the chemicals such that the evolution of life would be inevitable. But even given such a situation, the science of statistics comes into play. So I brought a couple of decks of cards since we talked about this before. I'm not much of a card player, but I do know that there are 52 cards in a deck, and that leaves out the Joker. These are not shuffle decks. These are decks that have been stacked. The chances of pulling a card out of a shuffled deck, any one card, is 1 out of 52. But I've stacked the deck, so we have a king of spades, we have a queen of spades, we have a jack, we have a 10, we have a 9, an 8, and a 7, and a 6, and so forth, like so. Now, the probability of any arrangement of cards that has already been dealt is 1. The probability of any event which has already occurred is 100% or 1. For people who buy lottery tickets, the statistics are printed on the front of the ticket. And the punchline is, if you don't play, you can't win. But if you do play, you probably won't win either, unless you get exceptionally, exceptionally, exceptionally lucky. As I said before, living cells are extremely complex. Living cells have been on the planet Earth probably for about 3.5 to 3.8 billion years. Now, let's get back to the cards for a minute. I went from the king on down to the 6. If this were a shuffled deck, and it is not a shuffled deck, I've stacked the deck, what would be my chances of matching that king of spades with another king of spades? Well, it would be 1 out of 52. And sure enough, another king of spades from my stacked deck. What would be the probability of now pulling the queen of spades out of this deck, which is now missing the king? It's 1 out of 52 minus 1, or 1 out of 51. To match the jack, 1 out of 50. To match the 10, 1 out of 49. To match the 9, 1 out of 48, and so forth and so on, all the way down the line. So, if you wanted to combine the probabilities, the probability of matching all of the cards in a deck of cards would be 1 in 51. The first one's on the house. 1 in 51 times 1 in 50 times 1 in 49, 1 in 48, and all down the line. And if you were to multiply all of this out, your pocket calculator would probably drop dead. You would need a computer. The number would be extraordinary. The probability of matching the first 7 cards is 1 in 14,658,134,400. Now, there are 20 proteins that are coded by the DNA. There are 20 amino acids that are coded by the DNA. They have names like alanine, leucine, isoleucine, and of course the reruns of I Love Leucine. Most of them end in INE. What's the probability of choosing one of those amino acids when there are 20 of them? It's like having a 20-card deck. It's 1 out of 20. What's the chance of putting in the next amino acid in the right sequence? It's, again, 1 out of 20, because we have a random pool, a literally infinite number of amino acids in the cell. Not infinite, but large enough to call it like that. We have to make some 10,000 or more different proteins to have a functional cell. Some cells have not only tens of thousands of proteins, but maybe 20 or 30,000 different types of protein. So the statistical probabilities become extremely low. Then there are the enzymes that are involved in the clotting of the blood. And there are the enzymes that are involved in retrieving the energy from glucose that photosynthesis has stored in the glucose. Extracting the energy from a molecule of glucose requires over 50 enzymes and almost 100 different chemical reactions. It has to be done step by step, just a little bit at a time, because if you released all the energy that's in a molecule of glucose, you would have a lot of energy. As a matter of fact, gram per gram, kilogram per kilogram, pound for pound, sugar contains more energy than gasoline. So I've brought a mortar and pestle along, as the audience watching can see, and Pastor Pedersen can see. It is devoid of anything. We've also brought some other little things along here. We've brought some metal lids along.
So in other words, with the cards, what you're saying is that in order for all of this to be happening without God, is basically the odds of it happening are 0.
No, not 0, but infinitesimal. Very, very tiny. And everything fits together just a little bit too neatly to be real, to be an accident. We brought along some sugar, ordinary table sugar. So to make sure that we're not fooling anybody about what's going on here, I'm going to have Pastor Pedersen taste some of this to be sure that it is sugar. Just a little bit on the finger there.
Yeah, it's sweet.
It's sugar. And remember, just a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go
That's
down.
right.
We don't want to blow anything up here, so we're not going to use a full spoonful of this sugar. We're going to use some of these crystals. This is ordinarily CNH, like Mommy uses to bake her cakes, and we're going to grind it up here. Now, in order for chemical reactions to occur inside cells, we have to have catalysts. Organic catalysts are called enzymes. And we didn't bring any cells in here to grind up, but we did bring a catalyst. And this catalyst is in the form of ordinary, dare I say it, cigarette ashes. So we're going to put a little bit of this catalyst in here, and not too much of it because we don't want too wild a reaction. By the way, if you try to burn a sugar cube, it won't burn, but if you dip the edge of the sugar cube in a little bit of cigarette ashes and then use a lighter or a match or something of that nature, then we can get that sugar cube to burn with a nice blue flame. So we're going to put the catalyst in here. Maybe we need just a little bit more of this catalyst. Usually when I do this for the students, I'm in my Professor Pepperwinkle of the University of Schnitzelgrad outfit with the fright wig and the funny glasses and the lab coat with a sign on the back that says, "Kick me." And the students get a real charge out of that. But anyway, I've ground this catalyst into the sugar in this mortar and pestle. And I think we've ground it almost enough. If a cell were to try to get the energy of sugar out of the sugar without all of these specialized enzymes, and like I said, around 50 of these enzymes, we'd have a mess on our hands. So now we have a little bit of the sugar. We're going to put it on here, not as much as I usually do. When I'm doing this for my students, I use a magic wand. But for right now, we're going to use an ordinary match and show you what would happen inside the cell if there weren't all of these specialized enzymes, if there were only one tiny one-step pathway of extracting energy from the sugar. This is what would happen. The cell would burn itself up. But by these tiny stepway pathways, anaerobic glycolysis, which is the splitting of glucose into 2,3 carbon units, and then something long and involved called the Krebs cycle, we get between 70 and 85% of the energy out of this energy source, carbohydrate. If I could design an automobile right now with an efficiency of 70 to 85%. In 2 months, I'd own half of the 50 states. So it's all, and this is only one of the thousands and thousands reactions that occur in living cells that are governed and monitored by enzymes, without which life could not exist. And it's difficult to imagine a cell that would be so simple without having thousands of these enzymes. It's difficult to imagine anything like that coming about. It's a mystery. I've read all kinds of articles about it. I have all kinds of articles here with me, but not one of them gives me a formula that says mix this, this, and this, and something will pop out of the flask or the beaker or the test tube and present me with a business card or shake my hand. And until that time happens, I'm still going to wonder about the origin of life. And I'll leave you with the words of Oliver Wendell Holmes. Whether you believe in creation or you believe in evolution, God, man, at least think that you might be wrong.
Yeah, so science is really, I mean, it's really such an interesting topic, but just as you've been explaining this, you know, as I look at, well, there's a person, there's a tree, there's, you know, all these things about creation, but just how intricate and how involved, and you know, just how, you know, the precision that all the things that have to go in order for life to be. I mean, it's just all the kind of the behind things, just for us to be able to breathe the air and to live life each day. Just all the miraculous things that are happening, that God has done in order for that to happen. Well, David, this has been very interesting. I really appreciate your sharing with us, you know, some of the science of God's creation, and helping us to understand just a little bit more about it all, but just how fascinating it all is. And here again, this is Dr. David Miller. He's a scientist, a former professor, and so we just appreciate you, and God bless you as you continue your work. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pedersen.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us here as well this day.